Life in the backyard garden had been going smoothly for the last couple of years. The birds were happily feeding at the bird feeder, and the local squirrels were dining on the porch of the Squirrel Cafe. But when I looked out the window on an early February morning, a squirrel was scarfing down his breakfast on the bird feeder. During the early days of the pandemic, I had settled the issue by building a new setup with a squirrel baffle to keep the squirrels off the feeder, and then built a squirrel cafe that only they could open. Obviously, something had changed, so I set up my camera and started watching. On this morning, the squirrel cafe was empty, and Scarlet was eyeing the bird feeder. She disappeared into the garden, then climbed up the stalk of my wife's favorite pincushion plant. The launch point was about 3 feet off the ground and only 4 feet from the bird feeder basket. Hardly a tough challenge for a mature fox squirrel like Scarlet. This clearly wasn't her first rodeo as she climbed up to the top, declared success with a wagging tail, and proceeded to feed on her favorite food, black oil sunflower seeds. My first thought was I could cut off the branch on the pincushion plant that she was jumping from. That would keep Scarlet and her friends off the feeder. But the wife immediately vetoed that idea. Then I decided it would be fun to study the physics of squirrel jumping before shutting down those rogue squirrels. Back in the early 1600s, Galileo had realized that cannonballs followed a parabolic flight path, and that adjusting the angle of the cannon was critical to hitting a distant target. In the same way, the squirrels need to launch themselves at the right angle and the right speed to reach the basket. So by fitting their flight path to a parabola, I could determine the basics of their motion. The squirrels could not use a running start like a broad jumper or high jumper can at a track meet. Reaching the velocity of 9 miles per hour off the branch from a standing start is no easy thing, and sticking the landing is not guaranteed. In fact, with each successive landing, Scarlet's impact was rotating the basket away from the launch point, making each jump more difficult. So she began looking for an alternative way to get on the feeder. For me, this would have been problem solved. However, I had noticed that Scarlet was pregnant, and this explained why she was so determined to eat huge amounts of food each day. I decided to keep the bird feeder within her jumping range during her pregnancy. In one of her best jumps, she landed feet first inside the basket and sent the mourning dove flying. While the small birds kept their distance when Scarlet was on the bird feeder, Jill, the longtime mate of One-Eyed Jack, was irritated with Scarlet, so she pecked at Scarlet's tail and buzzed her. But Scarlet was having none of that and didn't seem to be perturbed. She was a mother-to-be and needed all the food she could find. A pair of band-tailed pigeons often landed in the basket in search of a few crumbs. While they were too clumsy to take food directly from the feeder, occasionally they would sit below as a squirrel discarded unwanted seeds. It was a rare case of cooperation between squirrels and birds. Another example of cooperation occurred when a possible predator showed up like a feral cat. Often it was the bird that first sounded the alarm. Squirrels use their tails to signal irritation, excitement, and in this case, danger. There was a cat hiding under the bushes below the feeder. While it's unlikely that the cat could climb up the feeder, Scarlett's only escape route was down to the ground and then up onto the fence and into the trees. A spotted towhee had also seen the cat and began to warn nearby animals of the danger. Finally, Scarlett made a run for it, off the feeder and up into the tree. The cat stared briefly at the camera before slinking away, leaving Scarlett to continue to scold her from high in the tree. While Scarlett was the most frequent visitor and consumed the most birdseed, Biff also came by, and he was the only other local squirrel able to make the jump. Like Scarlett, he would first empty the squirrel cafe with its mixture of walnuts, pecans, almonds, and black oil sunflower seeds, before trying his luck jumping onto the bird feeder. On this day, the squirrel cafe alarm was on to announce squirrel activity. Normally, this was muted to keep from irritating the wife. His choice of launch point and jumping style was remarkably similar to Scarlett's, although she was able to jump farther. There were a couple immature goofball squirrels that appeared from time to time, but they were too young to reach the feeder. In late March, Scarlett disappeared for a few days, and when she reappeared, her body had slimmed down, indicating she'd given birth to her squirrel pups. To feed her pups, she was now frequently emptying the squirrel feeder, then jumping on the bird feeder for more. No longer loaded down by the pups, she was jumping better than ever. In mid-June, one of Scarlett's newly weaned pups with a pure white underside dropped by. He was already an expert at taking advantage of the squirrel cafe. While Scarlett still came by, her visits were shorter, and she was no longer scarfing down huge amounts of birdseed. So the springtime, with its high squirrel activity in the garden, was coming to a close, and the birds could again feed in peace.